My name is Greg George. I went to Hillsdale College after high school, went to Western Michigan, grabbed my master's in business, and then went unemployed and got caught watching the news and saying, this is ludicrous. Fixing the economy isn't the government's job, it's ours, so they need to back off. So I looked up organizations, and AFP happened to be hiring, and they created a position to put me there. So that's how I got started. I wanted to go through, this is just very niche specific. How many of you are familiar with AFP in the first place? Most of you in here. So we're economic specific. We're going to deal with labor, education, taxes, spending, things like that. So I want to highlight particularly the road increase funding here. Our slogan for this particular thing, just think, prioritize the spending, don't raise taxes. Because when you talk about a tax hike, what is a lawmaker telling you when they say we have to raise your taxes? Well, they're saying that we're going to cut your budget. And a majority of lawmakers there are supportive of increasing the revenue towards roads, but what isn't being discussed is the idea of cutting spending in certain areas and redirecting that money, or finding a better way to raise the revenue, because I'll get to that in a second about sales tax. But just think of it as a cut in your budget, because it's exactly what a tax hike is. Governor Snyder, in his 2013 State of the State, came out. This was like one of his major priorities besides Medicaid expansion and healthcare exchanges was road funding. He said that there's a need to increase road revenue, and you can think of the number somewhere at $1.4 billion. It depends on how the calculations go, but it's somewhere between 1.2 to 1.6. So 1.4 is a fair number. It's one that's been used in the news a lot. So they want to raise taxes to fund roads by $1.4 billion. Well, what do we spend now? A good starting point is like, what do we spend now? Where are we now? Well, the state restricted funds, just state taxes only, is just over $2 billion. So you're looking at a 64% increase in tax, over 60% increase in taxes on just state. The federal taxes, when you add those in, Michigan gets just under $3.5 billion in total transportation revenue. Now, Michigan Department of Transportation will point out that it's pretty much a flat line. We've had flat line revenues since 1997 or 2000, and the taxes haven't increased since 1997. Well, what also hasn't increased is population in Michigan. Right? So we haven't actually had the number of taxpayers here. So they leave that statistic out to benefit them. But I want to show you that this whole thing is turned into a crisis. With most government things, it's the war on something, or it's a crisis in road funding, it's a crisis in health care. And I want to show you where we are right now based on Michigan Department of Transportation's standards on how they judge themselves and rate themselves on roads. So this is harder to see, but I'm going to just sort of describe it. The red line at the top is the 90% line. And that is essentially 90% is what they judge themselves on good or fair roads. So when they make a judgment call, they want to be above that 90% line. Well, right now we're at 87%. But you'd make it. And roads aren't good in certain areas, that's for sure. And I know I-75 through Troy is not the greatest. But there are other areas, too, that are local roads that are pretty bad. But if you look at it, are we really in a crisis? Are we really in a crisis where we have to raise taxes and revenue right now? Well, no. The answer is no. Because I'm going to show you this previous graph that I grabbed off Mackinac Center's website from their other statistics that showed we were going to get above the 90% and just skyrocket down to the bottom, right? I guess that would be the inverse of skyrocketing. We were going to just drop off because most government graphs have that like some sort of hockey stick. It's either hockey stick up or it's a hockey stick down. And this is a hockey stick down. Well, in 2012, which is the data that they most recently have, we were supposed to be under 74%. We're at 87%. Now, a lot of that was because they sold road bonds and they got some stimulus money, but we're not in total road crisis mode if we're 3% off on what they judge themselves as what they want us to be at. Now, roads are important for the economy, so we're not saying to not fund them, but if they're a priority, let's eliminate some other things and redefine what the state government should be involved in the first place. So Snyder comes out and he has a couple proposals. And when you think of raising revenue for gas, it's the gas tax, state gas tax, and it's registration fees. And so that's exactly what he proposed increasing. So the slogan is, so on the other, I want to give you some hope here, because everybody can walk out of here promoting saving lives. And that's because the slogan that they're using is to just fix the roads, save money, and save lives. Well, the implication is that people are dying, right? People are dying because we need to save lives. Well, this is a priority in 2012. So that means everything that we spent money on that was wasted in 2012, people directly could be said died because of that, because the money wasn't prioritized in the legislature. So that's me sort of like going MoveOn.org, Progress Michigan on Republicans and saying, okay, this is ridiculous. One, I think this is probably the stupidest slogan you could possibly have. So I like to attack it. But anyway, so when like I said before, to raise revenue for roads, your gas taxes and your registration fees. So the initial proposal was to change the 19 cents flat tax that you have on per gallon of gas and the 15 cents for diesel and increase those. But the whole increase would come about with a conversion to a wholesale tax. And I'm going to get to that in a second, but that amounts to somewhere between 33 cents and 37 cents. And that depends on the average price of gallon of gas and what the average price of the wholesale was. So as that increases, that changes. But don't worry, the original legislation had a protection for you. They weren't going to allow it to increase more than 1 cent per year, and they would cap it at 50 cents right now. But what if lawmakers change? Or what if the crisis is still a crisis? Well, they can just change these things by opening up the bill and modifying it just like they do with most things. So do you trust the politicians to have this? No, right? It's a false choice. The other thing, too, is the wholesale price. I'm going to explain that here. When you convert it to a percentage, what it's going to do is it sounds great. We're going to fix this problem forever. That's the whole goal. Is we're not going to have to increase revenue for this because it's going to automatically do it. Well, that's just saying that taxpayers don't deserve a vote in it. And another thing that it does with the wholesale tax is when you do that, regulations are definitely impacting the price of a wholesale. Well, what happens if Washington, D.C. comes out with something that makes gasoline more expensive? Well, that's going to impact the average price of the wholesale, and that's going to be a de facto tax increase in everyone here that you didn't vote for. So the problem with that is it's not transparent. Taxes should be very transparent. So you see it, you know where it's going, you know what it's being taxed. And gas taxes are a good way to do that because it's a user fee, user pay, user benefit system. But converting it to a wholesale tax is not the way to go. The next thing is to surprise you on your birthday with a tax increase for your registration. And that ranges anywhere between 60 to 80%, depending on what kind of car you have, what the list price is, and then also whether or not you have other things too, how many cars you have. But it's anywhere from 60 to 80%, and it also originally changed the way that it would gradually decrease down to 72.9%. And it would leave it the same price, the tax hike, for 10 years. And then it would cut in half. So you wouldn't see a reduction until the car was 10 years old. Now that wasn't very popular. Go figure. So the alternative was, we'll give you a choice. We're going to give taxpayers a choice. We're going to allow them we're going to put on the ballot an increase in the sales tax. So if they don't like any of option A, if they don't like this option at all, they can just vote to say, screw this entire option, get rid of all gas taxes, and we'll just pay a higher sales tax on all goods. So, moving it from 6 to 8. Michigan right now, if you look at our total taxes on gas, we're the 4th highest in the country. The original proposal A that Governor Snyder proposed would give us the highest taxes on gas in the country. Immediately. By a lot. The next proposal to do sales tax, if you don't like that, you don't want to be the highest gas taxes, well, we can have the highest state sales tax in the country. Those are awful options to making Michigan competitive, and it's not reinventing it, so to speak, as he says. So, other options that were discussed that weren't proposed, and I'm getting to where the most likely option will be, was to increase the 6 mil state education property tax, to extend sales tax to services, so hopefully your business has a lobbyist and can exempt yourself. Because the big story was during Granholm, if you guys remember, the golf courses were able to get exemptions and ski resorts weren't. Well, whose lobbyist was present on that day, who had one, and who was getting paid better, or who had the better relationships. So it's just another awful way to try and raise revenue. And again, it's a tax hike, which is a budget cut for you. And it's showing that they're not able to just prioritize spending. So the most likely option, and actually Tom might know more, but this is sort of what we're getting, will be the option, is that when you go to, how many of you know when you pay at the pump, when you go, the price per gallon includes a sales tax? How many know that it doesn't go to roads? A couple of you, right? None of that goes to roads. So that's why we have the highest, very high total taxes on gas. And another thing that's kind of interesting is the sales tax is on top of the federal tax. So they add the 18 point something cents per gallon federal tax and they sales tax the tax to get more. But if you exempted gas from sales tax, that's roughly $1 billion, like $960 million. is basically what it is. Well, that's a huge chunk of what they want to put into roads. And that's what should have been going in the first place, probably, since we were paying for it, and everyone in this room thinks that the money they use there goes to the roads they drive on. Well, that's not the case. So there's a proposal, there's a bill, I think it's House Bill 4359, will exempt gas from sales tax, and it discusses that in the legislature. But they still want to convert to the wholesale percentage instead of the flat one, which takes your vote out of it, your call with the lawmaker. And also, they're still talking about increasing registration fees by somewhere between, I think it's like 5% to 20%, depending on whatever bill that you look at. But it's still a tax increase. They're not talking about cutting spending. Now, what does the sales tax go to? Who can guess? I mean, who can guess? Where does the sales tax on gas go? Schools and local governments. Well, they're not going to sit quietly by when they lose $900 million. Not $900 million. The schools will lose, I think it's like $700 million. And I highly doubt that the MEA and the ATF are going to sit back and be like, well, all right, saving lives. Yeah, you would think, right? You'd think, well, we're going to save lives, and they can get to school on time, and they can work. No, they're not going to do that, right? They're going to say, well, we need to raise taxes for schools, and that's sort of exactly where it's kind of going. The discussion is moving towards no one really likes to raise gas taxes when you're going to the pump now and paying over $4 a gallon. That's not exactly an easy thing to sell. But if you were to fix the sales tax issue and revenue neutral it, which would be a good idea, and cut spending and prioritize it, you could actually get something going. But the education lobby, the local government lobby, they're going to be teaming up, essentially, is what we think, to sell a sales tax hike. That's still being discussed, except it wouldn't be 2%, it'd be 1%, so you'd be paying 7% on certain things. But in order to do that, you have to get a 2/3 majority vote, or supermajority vote in the legislature to put that on the ballot. Well, you need Democratic votes to do that. So in order to do that, you can sell it as more money going to education. And it puts very powerful lobbies teamed up together to do that. You have road lobbies, the Michigan Transportation Team, which just came up with that magical slogan. And then you have the education lobby and local government lobby. They can all sell it as more money for kids, more money for police, and more money for fire, which is the de facto way to get tax increases on everyone in this room. It's way easier to sell those. Now, we have had extra money come into the general fund. If you've paid attention to the news, now everybody's lined up to get some of that money. Governor Snyder and the legislature have said we can put about $350 million of, I think it's nearly $500 million, into roads. Well, that helps us kind of keep the discussion going. So thankfully we've had that extra money being able to go in, and it slows this whole tax hike down. So what about cutting spending? Now, how many of you in this room have watched the new Wizard of Oz movie? This is twice as many as normal. There's 4 of us, there's usually 2 of us, and it's me included. That movie cost Michigan taxpayers about $40 million.
What? Wow.
$40 million. And this is after the tax hikes the subsidies for film were capped. So we spent $40 million on just that movie alone. Taxpayers sent it. And as far as I've looked, Disney makes money every year. Right? I love movies, but I don't care to have my money spent on it just so I can have Hugh Jackman show up in Detroit or something. What's that?
Yeah, like Hollywood has our back, right?
Right, exactly. But regardless if they did, I still wouldn't like my money subsidized on movies that I might not like.
I'd maybe think about it.
Right.
Well,
There's plenty of ways. We have about a $50 billion budget in Michigan. Now, some of that is federal money, but a large chunk of that is state taxes. And what are we spending the money on? Well, some of it's going to film subsidies. Now, House passed a budget without it. The Senate has put it back in, and in the conference committee, it's back up to the $50 million. So $50 million is going to be the cap. We're going to spend that on movies instead of saving lives, right? We're not going to save any lives. That $50 million is too important. We have to have an industry that can move anywhere in the country, come here for temporary jobs. We should stimulate, just bring the whole Hollywood here, as far as I'm concerned, right? They can just move to Detroit. There's plenty of buildings. We just stimulate that entire thing if it made sense. This is a joke, right? This is a joke.
And they need a Second Amendment.
there are a few other things that we have. So our goal is to essentially, so as libertarians or conservatives, those oriented-minded people, we like to come up with like the main solution, have it ready to go, and then have our, essentially I call it my report, my 20-page report, fully cited, footnoted, and here's how we fix roads. All right, but by the time you hand in the report to Governor Snyder, he signed a bill saying your taxes are higher because you weren't fast enough to get the process slowed down, because it's, again, a crisis. So our goal is to find low-hanging fruit. Film subsidies is one. 21st Century Jobs Program is another. It's essentially it's a corporate welfare arm where money gets spent into chosen companies with political favors, with promised jobs of like, we're going to bring 1 million jobs to Michigan, and they bring in one. It's something like, it's basically that bad. There's like, we'll bring in 5,000, there's 70. We'll bring in 300, there's one. Or there's just none, and the company never gets going. Look those up. If you ever, Mackinac does great reporting on this stuff, so sometimes I feel like my job is to like read and consume think tank stuff, and then boil it down into like how I can get this to groups. So that's like what I do every day. I'll read legislation, or I'll read a think tank report, or I'll read something from Cato, or from Reason, or from Mackinac Center, and then try and boil that down and get it out to activists. 21st Century Jobs, if you Google that on Mackinac, they've done tons and tons of reporting on it. They have tons of examples of like where this went bad. Representative Grimmel is a Democrat, has said in a Gongwer article that the money spent in 21st Century Jobs isn't getting the return on investment that we need. Right? This is good. We have a Democrat, we have Republicans that should be able to agree and say, okay, we need to make priorities. That's $75 million a year. $50 million for film subsidies. Another major one for us is prevailing wage. Now, prevailing wage means you have to pay the union wage on state projects, on state construction projects. There's federal laws that have a federal prevailing wage, but at the state can enact legislation to repeal prevailing wage. And a lot of it comes down to cost. The first thing people think of is like, we can save $107 million according to the Mackinac Center. But it's more than that. Because what does prevailing wage do? Well, it's picking one form of worker over another form of worker, and it's saying that someone cannot voluntarily say, I want to work for this wage. It's essentially the same thing as the minimum wage. But this is like picking a union worker over a non-union worker and mandating that this wage, it has to be paid. Because why? Well, taxpayers should pay more because this particular worker is more important. This is a joke, right? This is one of those things. So it's about cost, but it's also about government saying, at least in the state kind, that we are picking one over the other. So I said that on the radio yesterday, and I think that's how you can kind of move the discussion of prevailing wage forward. It's not just saving money, because how often does that work when you're talking to your independent friend or your liberal friend? Well, the money's worth it. The money's always worth it. But if you can say, well, do you think they really should be choosing one guy over another? That just sounds a little crazy. And then they have to stand against something voluntary. Like, I should voluntarily be able to do that. Are you saying I shouldn't voluntarily be able to do that, friend X? And they have to go, well, yeah, I don't think you can voluntarily. Wait. That's not very popular. So we have a bunch of things that came from the Mackinac Center that discuss how to cut spending. Those are 3 low-hanging fruits that are not being eliminated. So you could say, that doesn't raise the $1.2 billion. Yeah, but it's wasting $200 and $300 million. So we could essentially get these discussions going because the budget hasn't finally passed and tax hikes haven't come yet. So if we can slow the tax hike down and pick out, basically as groups, saying we want these programs eliminated, we have a really good shot at getting things that shouldn't be promoted by state government and money that shouldn't be spent by them moved into something that is a priority. There's a lot more. I passed out sheets if you didn't get one. They're up here. Senator Colbeck does come out, and he was one of the few lawmakers. I'm sure Tom McMillan has too, and he's been fighting inside on it. But Senator Colbeck came out, and there was a Detroit Free Press article. And I like to highlight it because it sort of promotes a couple free market ideas and the idea that we don't need to raise taxes or cut your budget. And at the time, when I put this together, they were expecting a roughly $500 million in the general fund, which we did get. He said we could freeze government spending at those levels, move that money into roads. That tackles nearly half the problem. Just to let you know, I like pointing this out. Right now you're spending $240 million roughly a year on interest payments for roads for the debt that they sold in order to keep it, I think, at that 90% level. A lot of it was front-loaded. If you read some articles, they'll say we were able to keep basically the roads at that status because we sold debt with future expected revenue in order to do the roads now, and it kept it at that 90% number. Well, now they're not able to offer new debt, but they could if they were able to increase taxes and new revenue was supposed to come in. So that's how they make those judgment calls. But the main free market thing I liked about it is you have a lawmaker in Lansing who's sitting there saying, well, why don't we do this voluntarily? There's a lot of state-owned land, bridges, and things like that. And one of his ideas was to leverage the assets and do like some sort of advertising on them for businesses who would voluntarily, associate with the state, say, I can benefit, my company can benefit from this, I'll advertise here, here, and here. And that's not taxpayer money, that's coming from businesses if they see fit, and if it doesn't work for them, they can pull back out of it. And that's another way to do it too. So I want to mention those ideas. Right now, the tax hike is not on the table, but they want something done by October 1st, which is when the new fiscal year starts. Does that sound right? Something like that time? Okay. Fiscal year starts on October 1st. So if they can get a supplemental appropriations bill passed with a tax hike or these other with the tax hikes it proposed, they can then get something started by October 1st. So you can see something maybe even on the ballot in November if they pass something. I think it has to be done by August, I think it's by August. Then they could actually put it on the November ballot, and then you'd be voting on a tax hike. Now, what can you do? Well, so this is the billboard that I thought was kind of funny, that they drive around Lansing. So this is the power of the lobbies that they have. And this is just a mobile one that drives around Lansing, and it gets the Lansing insiders. But they have things like this up on 496. I've seen them on, I think, I-96 maybe. But they're putting these up so that you can say, and they get it to, if you follow a lot of the social media, it's just fix the roads. Just fix them. Right? And you get sick and tired of hearing about it, and they're like, fine, whatever. Just fix them. That's the slogan, justfixtheroads.com, save money, save lives. Again, which implies that people have been dying in the first place, which seems unacceptable. So when you call your lawmaker, if you haven't taken action, how many of you have taken action on something before? Pretty much everybody in this room. Okay. If you haven't taken action on this is probably one of those issues you're going to need to. Now, it's hard. Yeah.
Who's providing the money for those advertisements?
So there's the Michigan Infrastructure Transportation Association as the road lobby. That's probably where some of it's coming. They have this thing called the Michigan Transportation Team. There's a list of pretty much every single lobby group you can think of, or local road commission.
It's paving companies.
Paving companies, things like that. Those that would think of companies that would benefit from a tax hike on roads, and those are the ones that are paying for it. But they aren't all able to vote like you guys can. Now, if you call up your lawmaker and say, I oppose a tax hike on roads, it's hard to peg a certain bill to this because there are tons. And this coming Tuesday, the Transportation Committee in the House is having a hearing on road funding. They're going to be discussing, I think it's like 4 or 5 different bills. 6, but are they all towards a tax hike? I don't think it's all.
Red lights.
And that's another one that's on there too.
Yeah.
That's I think one of the, I don't remember the bill number, but another one that's like traffic cams and things like that people in this room might be interested in. But a lot of it is the conversion to the wholesale tax, the changing the language in order to do that, and things like that. So call up and say to your lawmakers or email them and let them know. I mean, they're not in their offices right now. You can call and leave a voicemail. So when they get there on Monday, they listen to it. So if you're afraid to talk directly to them, call after hours and leave a voicemail. It's just as powerful. Say, I'm so-and-so from this district. I oppose a tax hike. So taking action is crucial to stopping this, just like it is before when Dennis was talking about how to get these things going. It takes extra work. But you have a lot of influence on lobbyists, or a lot of influence that lobbyists don't have, and that's your vote, and they can't vote 1,000 times in Tom and Milton's district. Thank God. So get on social media. If you're not on that, social media has been really pretty key. They do a lot of, the Just Fix the Roads things has a hashtag on Twitter, which is it's called Fix the Roads. And it's all one word with the £sign in front of it. And I schedule tweets constantly to be on there saying, I'm doing a gas tax talk in Troy, I oppose this, or I'll get on my personal account and do it. But it interferes with their discussion by using the same one. So if you're not, you could do stop gas tax, and then we can all talk to one another, which is important. But it's also important to show alternatives on the same feed of these that other people are going to get on, especially when they're advertising it in such a powerful way across the state. So take action if you haven't, in many forms, whether it be social media, because I like to point out one of them. I was in a committee meeting, and the energy committee meeting with Eric Nesbitt as the chair, and I was sitting in the audience, and he's a Hillsdale alum, and I was like, well, maybe I can just mention on my personal feed that I went to Hillsdale, and maybe he'll ask a question that I want asked. So I send a tweet, and he's a younger guy, pulls his phone out, and looks around the audience, like knowing that I'm in there, because I don't think this one was particularly broadcasted. And then I said something like, supporter of the free market, Hillsdale grad, ask a question supporting it. You are a major in economics from Hillsdale. I know what that's like, so ask this question. And he didn't right away, but he sort of changed the direction right at the end, and it was nice. But the power of like that, it's like almost like I sent him a text message, and I didn't. I sent him a tweet. And that's where things are going to go. So if you start to learn it, don't think that social media is going to go away. Like, you're not too old to learn it. If you think you are, you're not. It cannot be broken. You cannot screw up Twitter. You can accidentally type something stupid, but you cannot break it. And it does take that second to sort of get used to it. But once you do, and you realize like how quickly you can contact certain people, and then you can get a lot of them to discuss.
140 characters. So.
You do have a limit, so you do have to learn how to shorten your URLs, but I can show everybody how to do that. Well, that's another way to, it's a very important way to sort of interact on a day-to-day basis, but calling is obviously very key. My boss, Scott Hagerstrom, worked in the legislature and said that when lawmakers get a few phone calls on an issue they didn't think had any traction, they pay attention. And imagine if everyone in this group contacted their lawmaker and they came back and they had 20 voicemails on Monday saying, just heard a presentation on a gas tax. I can't believe you're going to raise taxes and not cut this program and this program first. And keep it very specific so that they're like, you don't have to come up with a solution too. A lot of times people fear calling in saying, they're going to ask me how to cut $1.2 billion. I have no idea how to do that. But you do know that it's their job to pass appropriations bills. And they get paid well enough and full time to look at the budget and see what is a priority and what isn't. And if your lawmaker is a Democrat in this area, is it? I don't think it is, right? It's you, isn't it? Are you in the city? You're not. You're close by.
I'm in Nolenberg here.
Nolenberg's okay. So it's hard to keep track. But even if you live, he's the new guy from Troy. That's right. Who supports an income tax cut or eliminating it. But anyway, even if you live in a Democrat district, the Dems are pegging this entire thing pegging Republicans as raising taxes and hurting the middle class working families. Well, what does this tax hike do? It goes right into that narrative, does it not? So you could call even a Democrat that you wouldn't have voted for or wouldn't have supported in the first place and say, you shouldn't be raising taxes on working families. Because in order to get that sales tax hike on the ballot, they need Democratic support. Tell them that they should pass prevailing wage, and they're not going to support this at all either. Because Democrats are opposed to that too. So there are ways to sort of like play the game, have the conversations, but you don't have to come up with the solutions yourself. This is their job. Remind them that it is their job. And demand that you save lives the appropriate way and get rid of film subsidies. Because even though if you're a movie fan like I am, we can spend the money wisely ourselves. They make it sound like money spent on film subsidies creates jobs. Well, so does the money that I no longer have, that I could have spent somewhere else, or put in the bank account to save, or paid down on tuition. It doesn't just disappear from the economy, right? It's in there somewhere, either savings or through consumption. Question?
And it seemed like essentially privatizing these state assets, like the vehicles and the websites and the rest stops and everything, was up to 10 times the film. 400-something million, right?
I think so. Well, that was like selling space, like selling advertised space. So it could range anywhere. That was just a napkin sort of calculation, but it obviously would probably raise revenue. And any amount of revenue raised voluntarily is a great one.
So
what's that?
There's 10 film subsidies there.
Yeah.
Getting rid of their, it sounded like their weird union rules or whatever. Like
the prevailing wage one.
The prevailing wage was 100 million. Something else linked. It was a few slides back. It was like another 400.
Yeah.
Like that, and the other thing, for all the wacky programs, you're there.
Yeah.
Tax hike.
What they should do is exempt gas from sales tax. Get sales tax out of the gasoline in the first place and make it so that when you go to the pump, the amount of money you're spending at the pump goes to the roads that got you there in the first place. Because that's how you really make the tax very specific and very user-based. So if they did that, that's basically $1 billion. Now, you still have to come up with the cuts if they want to. I mean, there are probably ways you could just not fund the education, but whatever, I'm not going to go into there. But if they want to make it a priority, then you still can prioritize it. It just changes the discussion. That's a great way to initially say, all right, roads are taken care of. Let's do this and pass it. And let's talk about, okay, cutting these programs to fund education and local roads and governments. And you can still, it's the same discussion. Right? You can still cut film subsidies to do it. You can still cut the 21st Century Jobs Program. There's other things in the MEDC that you can cut. The prevailing wage option. So all of those things should still be on the table if now kids and local governments are a priority. So that's, it changes what the discussion topic is, but not the programs that should be gone. And we should make sure that we are all sort of discussing at least some of the same items. That way they hear it repeatedly, like, oh, this isn't very popular. People want the film subsidies gone. And, oh, it can save lives at the same time. So, any other questions really quick? Yeah.
Real quick, you said we have the fourth highest
Total taxes on gas.
expenditure on roads.
Yeah.
And the argument is we have crummy roads. So if we're already spending way above average on the roads and getting crummy results, why would we reward that with even more money?
Well, most of it is the sales tax argument. So that includes the sales tax, which doesn't go to roads. So we've been sort of underfunding.
Road money to begin with?
Not according to MDOT. They've been doing a really good job. And if you take them at their word, I mean, even if you take them at their word, there are a lot of things that go into like why roads are bad. There's weather. There's the fact that Michigan was a crappy economy for like 10 years. We lost population. We lost young people that left the state. We were completely uncompetitive when it came to getting businesses. A lot of those things have changed. You've passed right to work. You've got business tax reform. But all those things don't instantaneously bring back an economy. Businesses don't just move because, oh, Michigan's good now, and like hop over there. Right? So it takes time to grow an economy. But the best way to bring road revenue is, if you're losing population, the consumption itself is down. So there's probably been a stagnant amount of revenue going in, not because we haven't raised taxes, but because we've been doing things completely to make ourselves uncompetitive in the first place. That's the real problem with it. It's not that lawmakers haven't tackled the issue since 1997. We haven't raised the road taxes since 1997. Well, no. Right? We did a bunch of crap to cause people to leave, which caused the tax revenue not to be there in the first place. So, and then when you have sales tax on top of it, that's where you're losing a lot of that number. The fourth highest includes the sales tax number. So when you include that in there, that's why we're so high up. I don't know what it would be if we moved down, but it wouldn't. I mean, we wouldn't drop below half. I mean, we're still have pretty high taxes, but a lot of it is Michigan just not competitive, and we are getting there. Okay, sorry.